speaking of young at heart, Jim Park and Joanne Ritchie, one of the longest-running segments here on Radio Nemo, on Road Gang Radio. Both of them incredible proponents of the trucking industry. OBAC.ca. Our good friends are here. Good morning, Joanne. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning to you.
Hey, Park.
Good morning, Radio Nemo.
There you are, brother. And by the way, last couple of times we talked to Jimmy, had a little bit of the lumbuckaroo of the lower Cockeracus. Dre had a little bit of a cold recently, too. It's good to have you in strong form and voice, Jim. We're just going to jump in. There's a lot of stuff to cover here. Dre, I will take one phone call, given the limited time we have. I will take one phone call if you want to talk to Jim and Joanne. That happens all the time. I have to tell people, no way that's happening. We got a lot of stuff to cover here. So where should we began? Like I said, you guys, the focus of government is what we've been kind of talking about the idea of changing. You can't ask for free trade from another country if you can't have free trade inside of your own. Is that a fair assessment, Joanne?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'll start with some of the boring stuff. Not surprisingly, the focus of our government over the past few months has been on building a more competitive Canadian economy. We're all elbows up here. You know what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
No? Yeah.
No, I do. Up. I know what it up. And by the way, there's another expression too, elbows up and above something. But go on, keep going. So
yeah. Anyway, that comes from our Mr. Elbows, Cordy Howe. We're all ready to protect ourselves and fight back up here. Anyway, strengthening our domestic east-west supply chain is a big part of that. So as a result, federal and provincial transportation ministries across the country have seriously committed to working together to identify and hopefully remove internal trade barriers in the trucking sector. So earlier this week, Transport Canada hosted a Trucking Hackathon. It was a senior level working conference, they called it. And we were invited along with other stakeholders to share our perspectives on regulatory barriers to internal trade and how best to address them. So before we get into the specifics of the meeting, I wanted to give you some background on what we mean when we talk about internal trade barriers. So this is the boring political science stuff. So we have something in Canada called the Canada Free Trade Agreement. People sometimes find that interesting that we have our own internal trade agreement, as we have with many other countries, but that's the way it works. We have, it involves the federal government and all of our provincial and territorial governments. There's 13 of them, so there's 14 signatories to this agreement. And the agreement, it allows for various governments to make exceptions for certain industries and for certain products if they believe that it's in the best interest of their jurisdiction to do that. So that means that there's certain rules and regulations and standards that inhibit the free movement of goods and services from one province to another. And we lump these together and we call them internal trade barriers. And it's actually one of the main reasons why our north-south supply chain is more robust than our east-west supply chain. I mean, geography and infrastructure have things play into that as well, but a lot of it has to do with these exceptions. Eliminating or renegotiating or working towards harmonization, as our political and economic situation changes, is nothing new. It's been going on for years, and in all sectors, including trucking, and that's where you hear all these great acronyms that we came up with Dave talking about, Canadian Council and Motor Transport Administrators and the Task Force on Weights and Dimensions, all those various groups that look at these what we call barriers. So the work grinds on very slowly, though, as the government initiatives do. But recent threats from the U.S. have put a renewed focus on unlocking East-West economic development opportunities. And as that happens, supply chains and the trucking industry are swept along into that. And there's a renewed energy to remove anything that makes it difficult to move seamlessly and productively as across the country, whether that's people or goods or jobs. So earlier this year, all of the transport ministers, all of them got down to work on something called, and forgive this, government label, of course, the Internal Trade Mutual Recognition Trucking Pilot Initiative. So they've been, working away at this. But now they've kicked it up a notch and they've moved into a new phase. They're using terminology like intensive approach. We've progressed from the pilot to the agreement. So now we're just calling it the Mutual Recognition Agreement, and hence the Trucking Hackathon. So around the table, there were all the federal, provincial, and territorial deputy ministers. That's a very senior government person. There was the Canadian Trucking Alliance, Private Motor Truck Council, Women's Trucking Federation of Canada. There was a handful of trucking companies, and good old JR and JP. So there was somewhat atypical, I thought this was interesting, atypical language in the invitation, like intensive approach. And they said they were looking for progress and some concrete results in removing impediments to efficient movement of goods and across the country. So that's setting the stage for why we were sitting at that table. And I'm going to let Park get into some of the
the particulars.
The particulars.
I want to.
We talked about. Yeah.
I want to ask both you guys a question before we kind of give way to Jim on this, and this is a 30,000 foot macro view of the situation. I will make no bones about it, and I'll have a debate with anybody, and I'll have a friendly, vibrant debate with people about it. I am ultimately a free trader, although I do believe that you can use tariffs as a mechanism to kind of sometimes allow people a softer landing in order to disrupt and change an economy. I also believe that there are bad actors in the world, of which Canada is not one of them, that you can actually use tariffs as a lever of pressure. That being said, I was kind of curious as you guys look to modernize your economy, because tariffs are a 19th century model of economic development. As you look at ways to kind of modernize your economy by opening up your own trade barriers, if in fact you begin to understand that the case is being made for free trade by doing it internally. Jim, am I making sense with the question? That as you guys engage in free trade from province to province, you're like, wait a minute, free trade really can be a good thing, especially when it begins at home. Is that fair, Jim? Long pause.
I would say that's a fair characterization.
Okay.
Oh, I'm wide awake. I'm just thinking. Formulating an answer. Trying to come up with something intelligent to say.
No, you sound, like I said, I know.
9 o'clock in the morning.
No, and brother, the long pause. The long pause I thought wasn't about you not having the question figured out. The long pause was like, yeah, Jim's got to really walk this thicket that I've actually put him into. Nicely done, by the way. All right, so you guys end up, and by the way, I want to point out that our friends here who are joining us today ended up with a seat at the big boys table because they are the big boys and the big girls. Go to obac.ca and find out more about them. Jim, dig in a little bit to the particulars of what was talked about around that table.
Well, they did this in two phases. First of all, they sat down internally and decided, they looked at a lot of factors and said, what can we do to make things move a little bit easier? And then they invited industry to the table to say, what do you see as barriers to trade? How can we smooth this all out so that it works better for industry, the carriers? And among the things that they discussed prior to sitting down with the carriers, were making changes to certain axle weight requirements, minor changes basically that are already sort of in effect anyway. Also creating a guideline for a 60-foot, 6-inch trailer that can be used across the country, not just in a few provinces, as is the case at the moment. And they also talked about establishing guidelines, national guidelines, not provincial here, for signage, lighting, flags, etc., for oversized and overweight loads, which has been an ongoing discussion for as long as Joanne and I have been going to these meetings, at least 25 years and probably longer because it was going on when we got there. Also, this is a kind of an odd one, recognizing a personal use exemption for electric vehicles weighing over 4,500 kilograms or 10,000 pounds, which would ordinarily have them classified as commercial vehicles. I'm not sure where that comes from or who was pushing it, but obviously electric vehicles are heavier with the batteries. So if you have a relatively small or a large pickup truck or something to that effect, it could inadvertently be classified as commercial. But anyway, that's kind of an odd one. And then naturally a comprehensive review of the National Safety Code standards. That's, kind of what governs the rules for trucking in Canada, to identify opportunities of mutual recognition and greater harmonization. Cue the band and the choir. Again, this has been going on for decades. Yeah, exactly. Nice note there.
Thank you.
So when the carriers came into the room and they sat down and said, okay, government said, what can we do to smooth out the bumps and make your lives a little bit easier, make it easier to do business across borders? First thing that came up was a more consistent process for the oversized and overweight load conundrum, lights, flags, and stuff like that. That only affects a fairly small portion of the industry, but it's a real problem for them. Also, permitting. Applying for permits for these loads varies with jurisdiction to jurisdiction, municipality to municipality sometimes. So that needs to be ironed out. The interesting one, I thought, was expanding the use of long combination vehicles. That's LCVs, as we call them, the twin 53-foot trailers. We have more or less two national networks at this point. We have the West and the East. So from Manitoba west through Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, there's a separate sort of bunch of harmonization agreements and handshakes that allow LCVs to cross those four particular provinces. In the east, we have Ontario and Quebec, and obviously New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So four provinces in the east with a similar sort of handshake agreement, but there's a couple of impediments to that the carriers would like to see ironed out as quickly as possible. One of them is the barrier that exists in Quebec. There's a section of highway that is yet to be twinned, and because that construction work has been ongoing for decades, you can't actually run an LCV between Quebec and New Brunswick. They get stuck at this particular spot, and they have to be broken up all across individually and reconnected in the way they go. So it's a bit of a pain in the butt. But in the West, where you would think you've got, the prairie provinces, wide open roads, territory, just, stick it in the wind and go. There's all kinds of little impediments, like the driver qualifications to drive LCVs. Obviously, the amount of experience they have and criminal records and all that other stuff. They're different. Arbitrarily, they're different because they were developed at different times and under different circumstances. So there's a push to get those driver qualifications and some of the other little idiosyncrasies that have arisen since these rules were written, and try and harmonize those. So that should be an easy fix. It's just getting the provinces to sit down and deal with it. Back east here, we've got the same problem basically as different little rules that exist between Ontario and Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. That just need to be ironed out. The LCV is the LCV, and it's somebody driving. So we just need to get everybody on the same page and call an LCV an LCV and just get it over with. That shouldn't take a long time to sort out. The other thing that I thought was interesting, coming from Canadian carriers, is they're talking about a federal CDL rather than 13 provincial CDLs, as is the case right now. Canada is a federation of 13 provinces and territories.
Yeah, and by the way, Jim,
13 different countries.
Jim, I want to point out to our listeners,
ahead.
many of whom the Canadians, of course, know this drill, and there are a lot of very, very smart, civic-minded Americans who not only understand their own government, but have an understanding of the people south of the border and north of the border. But a federation ain't United States. That ain't the same thing. Rolling across a state line is not the same thing as rolling across a province line, and there are some big and subtle differences, correct?
Correct. There are, yeah. And because of the way the Canadian Constitution and the whole Canadian framework is structured, provinces have control over transportation and licensing, driver licensing. So that opens the door, and it has over the years, the way these things have evolved. Each of the provinces has added their own wrinkle to the CDL, the commercial driver's license. The training is different, the qualifications are different, some of the standards are different, really, and it poses problems down the line where you're trying to establish, excuse me, this was another one that they were trying to sort out, was having a standard, a national standard for violations and sanctioning of points and stuff like that. Carrier ratings is the word I'm looking for. So when you apply a national standard, or try to apply a national standard to 13 different sets of carrier ratings and 13 different CDLs, it's really hard, because when you're saying a carrier in Manitoba, or a driver in Manitoba has 3 demerit points for speeding, well, in Ontario, that same offense might carry 2 demerit points or 4. It's arbitrary. It's just Manitoba and Ontario decided to do things a little bit differently. I'm not picking on those two. It's the same across the board.
No, and by the way, I'll make this really clear. You're using them as examples. The idea that there's an inconsistency. It's an inconsistency across the board. We could cite examples for all 13 places where all this changes in the blink in the blink of a border. So go ahead. I'm sorry about that, Jim. Just clarification. That's all.
No worries. It becomes a real problem for the carriers who, when you get down to safety ratings, you have a safety rating in one province that is, on paper, the same as one from another province, but in fact it can be quite different because of the way the sanctions are applied, as I was explaining with the speeding ticket. So the carriers are saying we need a single standard by which everybody in the country is measured, not just carriers in Manitoba compared to carriers in Ontario compared to carriers in New Brunswick. So it's a long time coming, and I'm surprised we've actually gone this long without some sort of a mandate that we create a federal transportation, trucking regulatory infrastructure.
Jim,
because we're doing business across borders.
I'm actually, and Joanne can answer this too as well. I'm sorry to kind of slow you down because so much of this is important, but I was curious, your own take on this. Is part of this due to the fact that because of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the way it was originally set up, even with the adjustments under the first Trump administration, it made it very easy not to deal with these problems because so much of what was dependent upon the trucking industry was about crossing borders, and therefore the stuff that was happening in the provinces. I'm actually asking a question, not opining here. And so much of what was happening between the provinces wasn't as important as it is now because the money was flowing from both sides of the equation on the country border as opposed to the provincial border.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I mean, you're right. And first of all, I want to go back to the word you used about modernizing our economy. It's not really about modernizing, okay? It's just about strengthening that east-west supply chain. And as I said, it's always been, most of our trade moves north and south. Some of that has to do with, with geography and infrastructure. If you look at a map of our two countries, sometimes it's just easier to get something from Ontario to Michigan than it is to get it from Ontario to Manitoba because of the geography and the infrastructure. So some of these exceptions that created barriers weren't as big a deal in the past. We were more concerned with removing any barriers to freely flowing north and south because that's the way our traffic, our trade was going. That's the way the economy was moving, and that's the way our trucks were moving. So this whole urgency to say, well, wait a second, if we don't have, or if we slow down that north-south trade, what are our options? And I mean, we're looking all over the world, not just to other provinces in Canada, but that was one of the things. Well, hey, what can we do right here in Canada as our economy changes? Obviously, the trucking and the logistics are going to go along with it. So, I think, despite what happens in the future with the north-south trade, I think there's going to, now that the energy and focus is on looking at some of those east-west opportunities, that's going to happen anyway. And I think that one of the interesting things that everybody agreed to at the meeting, this was a message sent loud and clear by industry, that no more studies. No more studies.
Oh, man, by the way.
We've got years of work, and here we go. Let's do it.
That's enough of that, too. And by the way, there are so many people in the United States who will tell you if you allocate one more nickel to fund a committee, to fund a study, we are going to actually go screaming from the building. The other thing I was kind of curious about, once again, a question, this is not an opine, is one of the things about Canada. It's a perception. There's a lot of vibrancy, of course, north of the border. I mean, we can talk about Toronto and Montreal and what's going on over in Vancouver. There is a sense of a quiet little place where people often stay where they're from, whereas in the United States, and like I said, I'm asking this question, in the United States, like, well, I'm going to move to Alabama next week. Look at Dre. Dre, in the blink of an eye, uprooted his life and now makes an hour and 15-minute commute to the city of New Orleans every single Monday through Friday. No problem doing it, and may end up uprooting his entire life and moving again to a different state. We'll see how that plays out. But I was kind of curious if, in fact, part of what makes Canada so unique is that it really is kind of like this wonderful, quiet little community next to the maniacs with the 3 boats in their garage.
No.
And I'm wondering if some of these trade barriers between provinces will also result in a more homogenization of Canada, because each province is so distinctively unique. If that's going to be neither good nor bad, but allow people a more bigger sense of mobility across the provinces about where they move and where they choose to live, because the rules won't change as much.
I'm just laughing. I'm chuckling. I'm taking up a lot of time, and I'm chuckling when you talk about us and our bucolic little spots here where we never moved. Did you know that Canadians, as a nation, we have more of our population holds passports than just about any other country in the world.
Yeah, and I think
and we move. We go. We move. And
Arizona.
It's not that we don't. Yeah.
I mean,
we move all across the country, and it's just that obviously it's a little bit more difficult when you've got to move. For the economy to move, when a truck has to move certain things, and they're limited by things like steer axles and weights and dimensions and that sort of thing. That's the stuff that really needs that's the nitty-gritty that needs the work.
Jim, I have a question.
I think the message got through loud and clear.
I have a question for Jim, by the way, and you can answer this well too, Joanne. And like I said, this is a question, a genuine question, not me like, I've got an opinion, a question. Are you saying at some level that if I own a trucking company in one province and decide to move to another, that I've got to consider all kinds of rules and regs, where in the United States, if I want to move my trucking company, I mean, with the exception of maybe California, if I want to move my trucking company from Louisiana to Texas, some tax stuff changes and some community stuff changes, but the rules are kind of consistent across the board. Is moving a fleet or moving a small trucking company from one province to another a real big heavy lift because of these changes? Or what is in place right now? Jim? Joanne, are you still there?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't being pensive. I was muted.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Go on. You follow my question?
Yeah, follow the question. We see movement amongst carriers from jurisdiction to jurisdiction here for, shall we say, regulatory expediency. It's easier to get insurance in some provinces than others, right, because they have a public insurance program versus a commercial insurance. So if you're a carrier that wants cheap insurance or you want to hide under the radar, you go to a province, you register your trucks in a province where they have one of the public insurance programs. You kind of disappear. You go off the radar. So that's a good thing. We're going to try and eliminate that too. But yes, when you set up shop in a different province, you have to abide by all the local business laws and tax laws and provincial stuff that relates to the financial side of the business. The trucking side of the business, the regulations also change because now you're based in Manitoba rather than Ontario. You have to comply with all the Manitoba requirements, which are inevitably different than the Ontario. So, yeah, that does throw a wrench into your work, slows you down, and really makes you think twice about making that move, unless it's for cheaper insurance.
Jim, Joanne, I am going to make a special request. We're going to run out of time here. We got so much more to unpack. I'm going to talk with Dave. Listen, I'm going to talk with Dave about Nemo Nation, and I would love to have you guys. We do a final 30 minutes in the first 3 hours of it to get a long-form conversation. Is over the next couple of weeks, on a week that you guys are off from Canada Calling, I might bring you guys in on a Monday. I'll have Claire Marie reach out because there is so much we didn't cover here. This is a lot of stuff. This kind of economic disruption, this kind of commercial disruption, and I'm talking about good disruption. I'm not talking about just bad stuff. There's some really positive stuff that's being discussed. As you said, Joanne, no more committees. The time for action is now. The time to get out of here is now. Promise me you guys will keep a lookout for an email or a message from Claire to get you guys in with a special edition of Canada Calling on a Monday with Dave and myself, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like a plan, yeah.
We can go on forever, so
yeah,
there's no end to our.
And
we're a big country, and we have lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about, and lots of groovy stuff to talk about as well. But we got to say goodbye for this morning. Our good friend Colin Long is coming up from OIDA. But thank you both so much. We will talk sooner rather than later. By the way, the second longest running show on Radio Nemo continues with Canada Calling. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, catch you later. Bye now.
See you later, everybody.
Holy moly, man. We didn't get halfway through that list, by the way, Dre, which, by the way, is a good thing. We didn't get halfway through Dean's list, which, by the way, is a good thing. We love it when you guys call at 615-292-6366.